Welcome to the Customer First Thinking Podcast, Episode 7. My name is Stephen Shaw, the host of this podcast. In this episode, we interview Tedde van Gelderen, president of the design firm Akendi, one of the first true experience design consultancies in Canada. Over the past decade, design thinking has grown in popularity as a catalyst for innovation. Historically, the design function has always operated on the business perimeter, answering to product management, engineering, or marketing. But with today's intense pressure on businesses to ward off digital disruption, design thinking has taken on a central role in freeing the corporate imagination. Until very recently, design thinking was not even taught in business schools. The curriculum has been overwhelmingly devoted to scientific management principles, which stresses measurement and process, Six Sigma, TQM, etc. Design thinking, by contrast, looks at problems from an outside-in perspective, how people experience the world. Applying abductive reasoning, it tries to reframe the problem by factoring in the often emotional and irrational choices made by customers. To think like a designer demands curiosity, insight, free thinking, empathy, and a collaborative spirit, attributes more often found amongst polymaths than technocrats. Design thinking leads to big ideas about innovative products, services, and business models. But to improve the usability of a product or service, a different design methodology, human-centered design, is applied. Both have their role in meeting the needs of customers, but what's missing is a more holistic view of the customer relationship, one that takes a broader view of the end-to-end experience, which is why experience thinking, a new evolving field, fills a critical gap in the innovation process. Experience thinking looks at what's important to customers, searches for unmet needs, pinpoints the desired outcomes, and homes in on the ideas that can turn a humdrum experience into one that customers will rave about. It can be thought of as the corpus callosum, connecting creativity and innovation in order to crack the code on difficult-to-solve problems or come up with truly unique experiences. When you take a holistic look at how people react and would interact within a set of events at specific points in time, you are implementing experience thinking, writes Tedde van Gelderen in his book, Experience Thinking. As the founder and president of the Toronto-based design consultancy Akendi, van Gelderen has worked with a broad range of companies over the past decade, helping them create what he calls intentional experiences. His framework divides the design process into 4 interconnected quadrants: brand, content, product, and service, each with its own goals, techniques, and outcomes. Together, they form the tapestry of a connected end-to-end experience. Prior to founding Akendi, the Dutch-born van Gelderen worked mostly in the area of user experience design, where he applied his postgraduate degree in cognitive psychology, either as a design manager or a consultant. Today, the company he founded has offices in both Canada and the UK and is considered a pioneer in the realm of experience design. I started by asking what inspired him to start his company at a time when design thinking was not yet in vogue.
I came from a company before that we sold to a software company, and I've always been interested in the human factors and the usability and the UX, user experience side of things. And I always felt that our companies tend to specialize too much. So they're either too much of a research company or too much of a design company. And I really felt that bridging the gap between the research and design is one of the critical challenges, really, that a lot of companies face. And whether they're consultancies or big organizations that create experiences, they're all suffering from this. We find a bunch of stuff and insights out, and then we have a hard time turning those into decent designs because they're different teams, different people, they're not connected as much as they should be in terms of getting the information out of people into a design. And so I wanted to have a company that does exactly that, which it does to this day, is that we are half and half, a research company and a design company. And some of our clients know us as researchers. Some of our clients know us as designers. And I love to do projects where we do both.
Does the work tend to bifurcate, or are you finding more and more people are asking you to go end to end on
More lately, last couple of years, I think the understanding of this space is growing, and I think it's better now than it used to be, that people do understand that they need both to get it right. So we are doing more and more projects where we do both research and design, and as seen as being one package, which is it's not new, but it's growing. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it helps to eliminate the complexity of managing multiple suppliers and handoffs.
Absolutely.
Obviously.
Yeah, but it's a challenge to be good at both and to show that you're an expert in both, because to my earlier point, it's a lot of people and our clients are still thinking sort of singular focus. You're good at X, right, and you can't do a lot of different things because they don't.
You can't do everything well,
No, and they keep separating out the experience into these different segments and seeing that it's not. You're not building the experience as a whole, and it needs research and design, which I always find funny because we do have the acronym R&D, and that's called, I know it's research and development, but I could easily say it's research and design. So we have R&D as an acronym, so why don't we use it properly?
Research, design, development.
Well, RDD, and there we have another process that was just invented.
Well, and it's a process-intensive subject there, and we're going to get into it a little later in this interview. When you started the company, there was no, I would say, by my recollection, governing ethos around the concept of design thinking. And in the years subsequent, you kept hearing that term more and more and more. But you use the term experience thinking. Do you make a distinction between the concept of experience thinking and the concept of design thinking? Is one subsumed under the other, or are they two separate things?
I try to stay away to some degree around the conversation of who owns what or what is part of what. You see the same conversation happen with UX and CX. And I'm going, well, is customer experience part of user experience? Is user experience part of customer experience? I think those are, it's interesting to talk about, but outside... Is
there a natural hierarchy?
And so CX and UX don't have a hierarchy in my view, because I think they're different parts of the life cycle. They're different parts of the experience that people go through. You start with CX to become a customer first, and then you turn into a user, but then you really turn into a customer again. So they really are intertwined. And they're not really an either or bigger or smaller. It's about the purpose in the moment. And so in the moment you are a customer, you're looking for value and benefit. You're buying something, you're engaging something, but then you're using. And that's really what I talk about in the book as well, is that you become a user at some point where you interact with things and you don't think about the value proposition or the benefits and all that stuff anymore. You try to make things work and get the information you need, get the transaction done, get the functionality going. It's all about that. But then after a while, you start to wonder, I got all this stuff working now. Was it worth it? Was it of value? And then you turn slowly into a customer again. And so it's more like waves that intersperse. And so that's on the customer and user experience side. On the design thinking versus experience thinking side is that design thinking as a background, it's a repackaging of a known process, which is called user-centered design. And user-centered design came up in the 80s and 90s.
User-centered design.
User-centered design, and it morphed after a while into human-centered design. And so that has a distinct set of processes and steps that design thinking really borrowed 95% of those steps, and they relabeled and redid them, and they added a couple more words like empathy, but really they're doing the same thing, which is nothing wrong with that, and I have no objection to design thinking at all. But it is a repackaging of a process that is helping you create products and services as a thing. So it's more singular in a sense of the way that it's trying to do its design thing. It's creating a design. So it's more singular in its thought, and it doesn't have the breadth that I was missing, that I thought, well, it's not about designing, it's about the experience, which is what absolutely the Experience Economy book talks about and others talk about. We are creating experiences, and I think it felt always constrained to me that when people say design thinking, that is always focused on the design people and the design itself, which like I said, it's a great thing that it opened a lot of doors and it opened a lot of more awareness for a lot of people, but it felt constrained to me. And I was saying, well, and I always talked to clients and to colleagues and to others about this notion that we are creating real experiences. We're not creating designs here.
But when you started the company, was that were you at the starting gate with that philosophy, or did you grow into that philosophy? Did you start out as a UX design company and start to realize that some of the concepts were very portable to other ways of strategically thinking about a business?
I did it very, very early on, yeah. So when I started the company, I started to think about these things very early on. I never did much with it in terms of shouting it from the rooftops. That's what the approach was that I was following and promoting. Mostly because I really felt there was such a big gap between what I was talking about and what the marketplace was basically buying or getting and understanding, that I felt I can talk about this, but really very few people are listening. And if people are listening, it's going to be in the field itself, and it's not going to be our clients because they're so far away. And really, that's what, for me, a big reason why the book took so long. Because if you go back and on the website, I've always talked about experience thinking, and I always talked about a lot of the concepts in the book, and for years, for a decade and more. But I've never really showcased it and talked about it as much because I felt, that gap is too big. And this is why I was happy with design thinking as an idea, because I think it started to bridge that gap. And I think we're getting close now. We're getting to a moment where people start to embrace this as a notion. Yeah. And the same you see with the experience economy as a book is 1999.
Yeah,
that's been 2 decades almost now, and still people talk about it as if it's a completely new idea, and that we're creating and staging experiences now. Yeah, that's people thought about this. It was great, and they captured it even in a book. Go read the book and look at the number there, the year there. It's not new, which is nothing wrong with it, but I think it just shows again how long it can take for basically the society to pick up on these ideas and to start to run with them.
Well, I think too the conditions have to be right.
Absolutely.
Businesses are notorious for embracing change very slowly and adopting new concepts driven by urgency and the threat of disruption, which is of course what every business is facing today. Yeah. And the struggle they're having, and that's actually something I did want to ask you about, because Forrester Research, you're familiar with those guys, produce these CX rankings every year and rank companies in different sectors according to whether they're improving or not, and certainly what they've been reporting on is a flatlining of those indices, suggesting that companies hit a wall at some point and can't keep pushing it further for whatever reasons. In your own observations of businesses, either clients or otherwise, what do you think, first of all, do you think that's legitimate, that companies are in fact hitting a wall? And two is, what do you think those reasons are? Is it because the concepts that you're trying to explain are abstract and complex? They require a willingness to embrace complexity, and most businesses, I would argue, in many cases, shy from complexity because complexity equals cost. What do you think are the contributing factors here?
I think you're absolutely right that there's a really big drive to simplicity, to narrow thinking. Is that as long as we solve my problem in my wheelhouse, I'm okay. And you hit a wall at some point. There's absolutely, I think I see a lot of that. And as companies get more sophisticated in their UX and CX practices, it's inevitable. And I think the next step up really is the logical one, which is what I talk about in the book, is that you need to start to look sideways. Yeah. You can't just keep optimizing in your own silo. Yeah. You need to start looking at this more holistically. And people go, yeah, we're already doing journeys. But like this morning, I had a conversation with somebody who does market research. And I said, so look at your journeys. For some reason, you think your journey ends when the customer buys. Mm-hmm. I say, yeah, that's when we do journeys, because we're looking at the CX piece. Yeah. And it ends when you purchase, and it ends when you engage. And then it stops. It's like, well, for real world people here, the experience does not stop. Right. We start actually now with the next phase in our lives, which is actually using your service, using your product. So the experience continues. Yeah. So when you think, and this is why I talk about life cycle experiences, is that, guys, we have to look at it from cradle to grave. From end to end, really end to end, not end to end from a buying perspective or a customer perspective, but from end to end from a service lifecycle perspective. Yeah. and then see what the experience looks like, and then you hop and skip through the customer, user, and customer again. But looking at it from that holistic perspective, that's where you have to now look sideways, because you can't figure it out just by customer experience. In the same way, UX people can't figure it out just looking at their own stuff. And because they are just as good and bad in that, is that we keep optimizing products, and then we don't know how to sell these things, or we don't know how to really engage to get to the product.
Right. So the disconnects, are they largely because organizations have yet to embrace we like to use this term, unified experience, which dovetails quite neatly with your concept of experience thinking, because a unified experience should be the outcome of experience thinking, should be the outcome of a customer first philosophy. So let me ask the question, is the question, is it really more a matter of organizational silos getting in the way of creating that unified experience? Is that one of the biggest obstacles to
I think
success?
So. Yeah, and I think so. And I think that's happening now, and we're slowly getting to the next wave, if you will. We had a wave in the past where there was a big change, and still, I'm even amazed now, like a word like digital transformation is coming up again as a big new thing, even though it's been around for a while. But we moved from paper-based, from hardware-based, from all the things that are more traditional to a more digital. And so there was this wave where we had to reorganize and restructure the organizations like that. Ultimately, you're forced to make a change. You're forced, because of the marketplace, to make a change, because you're going to lose market share, you're going to lose ultimately everything if you don't change and adapt. So I think the reason why people and companies start to look at this more is out of necessity, which I think is as good a reason as anything. I think there's no right or wrong, yes or no, or this or that answer, that they should keep out putting small fires and also maybe look at the strategic part. I don't think they should ditch the small fire stuff and look at this only. I think they need to do both. And I think they need to find money to do the strategic work as well as putting out these small fire, because they will always be there. I don't think there's an either or, but I think as companies look for different ways to differentiate, and I think there are good examples around that do that try to integrate it more, and you see it happen, like with an Amazon buying now a grocery store, is that people are adding to that value chain, they're adding to the overall experience because they see the connectedness of it all, and the idea of that is becoming stronger. So, and as companies start to adapt, they find the money to invest in that.
I want to come back to definitions for a second, because
Sure.
there's a lot of murkiness in the definitions. There's a lot of crossover, etc.
Yeah.
There's this idea of brand experience and customer experience. Explain to me what the difference is between those two things, or is it a hierarchy? Brand before customer, or customer comes before brand? How does that work exactly?
For me, brand experiences are the ones that you would define first. They come from within the organization mostly. They're not necessarily defined by the customer. They're reacted to by the customer, but not created by the customer. It's something that the company, and I talk in a book about the brand promise a bit, and I really like that term because I think it encapsulates so much of what brand really is about, is that you are creating a promise for people. You are creating something that you need to fulfill. Everything after that needs to
line up with a brand.
Yeah, and basically make that happen. So brand is always first. Customer is not first, is brand is first. In terms of designing things, in terms of creating things, so that's the other thing, is this. I very much talk about the processes to get somewhere, to create experiences. And so for me, the first step is the brand. And why do I say that? Is that I've been in too many organizations and too many places where we were forced to go back to square one because we created a better product, we created a better service, and because of that, we changed some of the experience.
You changed the value proposition.
You changed the value proposition, you changed the visuals, you changed the way that people talked about the experience, and people start to realize that and go, hey, let's back up. And then they start to talk about the customer experience. And they started to say, hey, we should maybe look at different ways to sell to customers and to engage with customers. Hey, let's back up. And then we ended up talking about the brand again. So I started with a product change, and a product improvement was all the way backed up to the brand. And then we said, well, we're not here to fix your brand. We're not here to rebrand you. That wasn't the whole purpose at all at this point. But
you need a defining vision.
And that was lacking. So it was creating, we would fill at the void that was created by our own making the experience on the product and service side so good that everybody else looked bad, and they're going, hey, we need to bump everything up now. And it always ended with the brand, which is why I say I start with the brand, because that's ultimately when you really try to peel the onion, you end up...
It must be hard for you, because it must be so tempting to, how should I put this, tread on the turf of agencies, because you're really at that point talking about brand identity and cutting to the heart of what the brand's all about and its purpose. And that should, in fact, inform how the brand presents itself to the marketplace, either in terms of experience design or, in fact, how it presents itself from a perception standpoint. It must be hard for you to resist the temptation to say, no, kind of, guys, you got the brand all wrong here.
It is, because it's as my company goes, we're not a full-on brand agency, so we wouldn't actually take on as much of that work, because we do a bit of that, but for me it's absolutely, but and that's partly why I want to write the book too, to position more UX, CX, and then the 4 experiences that I define: brand, content, product, and service. Looking at those angles to say, guys, these are all distinct experiences that have a distinct process with a distinct way of approaching this, but they all work together. Yeah. So forget about who's doing what or what company does that. You need to figure this out and do that in this order, because the order makes sense. So when we start fixing products, they are connected, and that's ultimately...
Well, it also leads to really a reinvention of the brand building process,
Absolutely.
right? All the textbook stuff basically is obsolete now. I mean, the way we start to think about brands is having an overriding purpose, which is connected to the values of your customers, which in turn informs how you speak to them, and et cetera, right? It also informs the customer experience.
It does. And then you keep going, and so you have the brand first, and the customer, and then the user when you are actually engaging with the product and service, which is something that a lot of times, again, is sort of left because we stopped, and because we are in this, as we just talked about these steps, we're crossing over different departments too in that, and then we get all disconnected, and then...
Yeah. Well, so I asked the question earlier about why did companies hit a wall? And that's exactly why
that's what happens.
This is damn hard.
It is.
Forget it. I want to talk about go back to this idea of innovation, though, because innovation is key to success and avoiding disruptions. We talked about it earlier. How much of innovation is determined by the design thinking or experience thinking process? Are those two tightly interconnected? How do companies make innovation a continuous part of what they do? Innovation across all fronts as well, that's what I'm referring to, not just product innovation.
Yeah. So for me, I try to separate the experience and sort of the human element to this, and what people do with the service and products, separate from the business thinking. So I see innovation coming from basically 3 areas, and there's no surprise there, I hope, for people that listen. It's the business will come up with new innovations, either from a business model perspective, from a market, from something there. There's a technology or content area that obviously comes up with new innovations because of the technology. And there's an experience area where there's just glue these other 2 together in a different way that makes up a new experience. I go, hey, that's new. So I see those sort of the 3 angles to innovation. And for me, experience that I talk about is one of those angles. I would never claim that innovation only comes from the experience. I do see a huge opportunity that I don't see always in the technology, even because there's a lot of new technologies coming up, and even with artificial intelligence now, a lot of people know that's partly repackaging of smart business rules, and it's not necessarily really self-thinking beings. That's not where we are right now. But in the experience level, there's so many brokenness there. There's so many opportunities where we go, I wish I had this now as the next step, or now I bought it and that's wonderful, but now I have to install it, and it broke, and I don't know what to do now, and now I have to get service and support. I don't know how to do that either. There's so many opportunities in the experience realm alone that I feel, if I look at innovation, if I was a CEO of a big company, I know where I would put my effort right now if I want to differentiate.
Yeah. Service augmentation to products has been a key way to broaden that experience. That is, adding added value, either free or otherwise, and that fundamentally changes the value proposition itself. But how do you? The part of mystifying me a little bit is how you organize around that. I mean, does a conventional product manager then have to have an experience hat on, or is he now reliant, he or she reliant on, for example, marketing to come up with ideas to augment that service offering in unexpected ways? What is the how is that supported from an organizational design standpoint?
Well, the first level is the one we talked about earlier, is the level of the life cycle experience. And so looking at the life cycle and looking at the experience that people have from really end to end, that is one real distinct point where you start to organize yourself around it, because it becomes a very natural connection. Like we talked about earlier, so you start off being a customer. You start to become aware, you have advertised, you have a trigger, you have a call to action, you start the engagement phase. And so the CX is sort of covered there, and then you morph into becoming a user. And the user interacts with the products and services, and then you become a somebody who needs support, and you get support and service, and then there's end of life, or you cancel, or you renew, and you go back the cycle. So one organizing structure is really the life cycle. And that's how companies should really more, and they do, because there's a real surge now in journey mapping and creating more experiences in a journey fashion, which is great as long as they become full end-to-end and not being chopped up in these areas.
So let me ask on that point though, who owns that experience? Because if no one owns it, if it's not clear who owns it, no one owns it. Should marketing own that end-to-end experience? Like who should be in charge? Yeah,
and this is back to that organizations need to adapt to the new reality. Is that slowly you see people have a CXO role, have a chief experience officer role. Those people, so unfortunately, it's another angle. So you have business people that are in the business seat, people that are in the technology and content seat, and there's people that are in the experiential seat. And you need somebody that starts to own that separately from the others. And they do cross marketing, they do cross engineering, they do cross media. They all connect these things, because that's the only way.
So their job is to be a unifying force in the company, to pull together the disciplines required to execute against the vision.
Absolutely.
The design vision.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be their role. Yeah.
And when you look out at businesses that are more mature in their adoption of experience thinking or design thinking, what are you seeing that chief customer experience officer more prevalent, or do you see other organizational models that you would recommend as best practice?
I think what I see a definite move towards that, and one of the very succinct things that you see right now is that more and more organizations start to talk about service design as a thing, as opposed to 10 years ago. Service design was really not a term that a lot of people would use, but more and more start to see service design, and it's often explained as saying, okay, I'm not in charge of just one single product, but I'm in charge of multiple products that combined form a service. And so people see themselves as service designers because they're in charge of or have influence over multiple products. And that's, I think, is a really good first step to go from that singular silos, narrow-mindedness, I'm only looking at one product design or one thing. Now I'm looking at multiple, and let's call it a service, which is great. And I think that needs to grow further. And that's something that I see change. But nevertheless, people are so, and organizations are so rooted in the way they've done things for decades, that I don't see this overnight.
And those P&Ls around lines of business unit dictate priorities. And
yeah.
If those priorities aren't shared priorities or shared goals or don't ladder up to a shared goal, it gets dysfunctional. People are fighting with each other for resources and justifying their own projects. And how do you even prioritize across multiple areas is a massive challenge, I would imagine, for most organizations.
Absolutely. And that's what you see happen. So I think partly why I wrote the book too is you have to start with a framework, to start to see the connections, to start to see that these are not isolated islands that people sit on. They are connected with bridges, and how do we form that? And I think that awareness is the first step. If people are not aware that it even exists, how can they even change?
So I want to get into the whole process, and you spent quite a bit of time in the book talking about that, but just before I go there, I'm just curious, when companies knock on your door today for help, are they still really focusing on low-hanging fruit, or are they more aspirational in their requests for you to come in and help them?
For us, it's we've been fortunate that we're increasingly doing the bigger picture and the bigger stories, the bigger challenges kind of projects, and I think that really is the direct relation to the awareness, increasing awareness of this kind of process in general, not just what I've talked about.
And are you working at the C level of an organization, or are you finding yourself working within the folks who manage the customer experience? What is typically your entry point?
Entry point is director and up. Yeah, so it's getting better. I mean, there's definitely and for me concretely, I mean, as a consultancy, there's different things you do, of course. So you have low hanging stuff that you still have to do, but I see a real change in the last 2 years around moving that up to the C level.
It's more of a corporate priority.
It's a corporate priority. It has more visibility. There's bigger budgets, and we clearly see that happen. And that's and people are not as scared anymore from. Of projects that really involve a bit more research connected to more design, and they see now that this is really a holistic kind of thing that you have to attack in that fashion, and I that's a very, very clear trend I see. Yeah.
Okay, so I do, because the book does spend a lot of time talking about process. I do want you to share your wisdom and experience around that. Let me deal with a few terms. You talk about an experience roadmap as an example. How do you define an experience roadmap? Is that the life cycle roadmap, or is that some other roadmap? What is that exactly?
It's the experience roadmap. Is definitely around the life cycle, and what it's talking about is to see that experience, that red thread that I talk about earlier in the book, around people having an experience that really easily crosses 4, 5, 6 different departments in an organization in sometimes a matter of days. Because of buying a product or signing up to a service, getting it installed and getting it used, and then interacting with it on a daily basis. For us as end users, as customers, for us it's a completely obvious connection. And the organization doesn't necessarily see that, but our roadmaps are really about, first of all, making that awareness, creating that connection, and then create a roadmap of how to integrate these pieces better.
Yeah. Can you bring that to life for me just a little bit, like a for instance or a for example of how that could work?
Well, if you're looking at experience itself, it's when you become aware of a product or service. It's like signing up for internet. I mean, it's if you're looking at service level, that's an easy one to think about. It's you become aware of that. You're moving a house. You have to reconnect your home. That you have to make the choices in. Do I stay with the same ISP or do I go to somebody else? What are they offering? So I become very much a customer there. Once you've decided that you're going to go with X, then you go into intermediate retail location, or you call up, or you go to their website. So you switch channels there to get what you need as a customer. Once you've done that, then the actual move happens. So now you're moved up to another, usually on the phone, a case manager or somebody who's dealing with your case to get all the things scheduled. And then when the schedule is happening, somebody who's usually from another company, as we all know, that is coming to do the install and the connection. And then once that's up there, then the thing still needs to work. And after a week, hopefully that's still in place. So all these are typical kind of scenario of that end-to-end life cycle that I talked about, that the journeys are more than the retail or even the customer side. It's the use side and it's the service side as well. And it crosses multiple channels. It's phone, it's email, it's website, it's person, it's physical, as you see the car, the van out there. It's all those things make up for us the experience. So when you think about that roadmap, it's about how do we connect that better, and not just looking at the emotion that people have, which is a lot of times you do in the journey map when people say how happy or sad are you. That's really the highest level. That's the satisfaction survey kind of question. That's only one piece of it. It's really about, so do we know exactly, and have we purposefully designed all these experiences within that journey? And are we really aware? Because that's what I find time and time again. When you talk to teams, they didn't even know that the team next door to them had this wonderful new idea to do blah, and they would never talk to each other because, hey, I'm the web team. No, I'm the dispatch team. I'm the driving around in a van team. They don't talk to each other, which is why I talk about connected experiences. Is that in order for this to work better, we need to not just have that journey map, which is great, but then actually what do you do down, and it comes back to the organizational structure. How do you make sure that these teams work effectively with each other to create a coherent experience?
So just to be clear, because this is where I get lost in the lexicon, does the experience map represent a broad and end-to-end view that is further distilled into multiple journey maps? Like what is,
yes.
A lot of companies today seem to start with the journey map, and that could be something as simple as an e-commerce transaction, or more broadly in terms of the conversion from buyer to customer. In your view, though, the experience roadmap is really the organizational pointer for the organization to say, here are all the opportunity areas, and then within each, you might have to conduct a journey mapping exercise to get to the heart of solving the specific problems and or innovating, I would imagine.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
That's the process. So you describe in the book, a number of steps in that design process. I wonder if you could just sort of walk through what those key steps are, the purpose, and how they connect with each other.
Yeah, so I have 4 areas that I talk about, and I chose those 4 as to being the key ones. It may expand in the future. So it's brand, it's content, it's product, and service. And one of the main points I want, and why I go into it a bit more, without really explaining how you do it. So the book is not about how you do it, it's about what are the steps that need to happen. And the first thing I try to communicate is to say, let's all realize we're doing similar things. Let's all realize we really have a similar process that we go through, which typically starts with strategy. Then you do research, then you do design, then you test and get feedback, then you build, and then you launch. The flow for whether it's brand, product, service, or content is not that different. And that's the first realization, because I find a lot of teams sort of fall over each other to explain to each other how complex their process is and how different that is from the others and how unique. And I'm going, well, yeah, maybe because you use all these different words, but really if you step back, we're doing very similar things. And that's good, because that means we can all talk to each other at the right moments to realize, oh, now you do a bit of research, now you do a bit of strategy, now you do a bit of design. We get those. So that's why I went into more detail there, and to talk about the things that people would do without saying how you would do it. Mm-hmm. Then secondly, it's for me around the realization that these 4 areas really work together well. So in order for people to understand each other, if they realize we're on the same boat, we're trying to achieve the same things, let's work together more. So because we realize we're all working towards the same experience, we're all feeding into that experience together. And that's the other purpose for this, is that if you take that level and everybody takes their own process and say, okay, this department is good at that, this department is good at that, but ultimately at a higher level, they can talk to each other. And so if there is a CXO role, they need an overarching framework to work with. And that's what this is supposed to be, is that we're helping understand that framework first and say, okay, these different departments and groups still need their own individual processes, but they are common, they are alike, and they ultimately all feed into that life cycle experience.
So just again, I struggle a little bit with the design problem because of the communication issues you alluded to, but is this a case of setting up, once these journey maps have been completed and you sort of identify the prioritization in terms of fixes or redesigns, as the case may be, are you setting up at that point multidisciplinary teams to solve the particular problem? Let me ask the other side of the question. Does the role of design thinking end when the problem's been codified and handed off to that task force, or does it follow right through to analyzing the success and impact of that change on the organization?
So the latter part, that's outside of the life cycle, because I took the more narrow view of the experience of the human as they go through the life cycle. So and this is why I mean by the earlier 3 elements, the tech, the business, and the experience, we're only looking at experience. So what you're talking about, the effectiveness for the organization, for me, that's a business question. And I think that needs to be separately dealt with. And that's not what this is trying to do.
But also business case, like there's a front end to that, right? Not just the measurement, Absolutely. But what are you trying to measure and what's the return on investment
Absolutely.
for that business, right? Who creates that business case for the organization?
That's still the people that are in the business, that are not necessarily experienced one. And I think that's an important point to make, because I strongly feel that even people that work in UX and CX, they have this tendency to sort of bleed into the other areas and to take over how tech is done and then also how business is done. And I really scratch my head sometimes and going, is that really your expertise? Is that really what you're supposed to do here? Or do you just think it's fun to think about business models? And you think it's fun to think about a new tech or new content, but it's not really your thing. So I'm a big proponent to saying, keep it simple, people. It's difficult enough to get the experience right. So can we just focus on that element and organize ourselves around that? But then collaborate, all the things you need to do for business, tech, and experience to make it all work. But don't take over. Don't bleed into that and say, because I think those are good questions. You need analytics from a business perspective. Absolutely. You need effectiveness measurements. You need ROI questions answered. Absolutely. But that's not a pure experience question, in my view.
But a big challenge is just defining the problem, right? And just stepping back and having the ability to say, what problem are we really trying to solve here by going down this design path? Mm-hmm. There's lots of trade-off conversations that must go on at senior levels around just that part of it. And it's one thing to define the ideal state, and it's another to confront the reality of achieving it, right? So that's change management at its basic.
Absolutely. And I think that is the big shift that we still see happening, is that traditionally we had business and tech, and those were the main areas in an organization, and they talk to each other. And so, hey, we can make a business case. Why should we build this? Why should we make this? And the tech says, well, we can't build it. Well, we can. And then we work together. Now we have this third component called experience, or the human side of things. And they have become a real voice. And they become a partner at the table. And I think that's the three connections that we need to see more of, that the experience becomes a full-fledged member of this. And it's not underneath the business or underneath the tech. But it's at the same level now, because they have something to offer in innovation. And I think that is, to your earlier point about the Forrester and all these other reports coming out where we plateau, is that I think we need to get more say in these experiential things, because they become the thing that differentiates us.
Or maybe another way of looking at it is that you can only push satisfaction rankings so high before you're just really in a parity state. How do you fundamentally challenge the existing business model that companies are operating by being truly disruptive? So that goes back, I think, to a question around insight and research, where we started with this conversation, because the integration of insight into this is obviously key to success. Mm-hmm. In your experience, what have been the key instruments or tools or methodologies that you've seen really work in getting organizations to actually, put customer needs first, or convert to customer first thinking? What are the aha instruments that you use or have seen used that really help convince people that have thinking differently about their customer experience is really essential to success?
And the answer is shockingly simple. I always find it's the by far the number one tool that I use, and that has been highly successful, is the basic premise of walk outside this building and go meet some people. Mm-hmm. And I still do this every month, that I meet a company that wants to improve their products. You start to talk about it. They have some sense of their customers, and they talk to their customers, but they never talked across this end to end. They never talk to their users. Even their customers that have problems, they come back. They don't have good channels or good ways to capture that information. And they're shocked when you say, so what about, hey, let's meet some people here. Let's talk to them. Let's learn what they're doing. Let's learn what the problems are they're having. It's mind-boggling, and I'm not kidding. Last week, I had that conversation with a multi-billion-dollar company, and I was in the department. And no, we never met. You never met your. You never met.
How did they stay in business?
How? And apparently, they guess right. They get something.
They must.
It's like,
they hire clairvoyants.
I don't know. I really, but that's the tool. That's the tool still to this day. And that was the same 2 decades ago. It was the same 5 decades ago. But it's still, I think that's the premise of this whole experiential thing, is that it's about the human. Meet these people, learn from them, listen, observe, understand. Take that information out, and like I said earlier, the premise of the company in the first place was to get research into design, and that still is very much the magic sauce here. And it is. I find it frightening to see the lights go on in people's eyes still, because I love it because you're adding value, but at the same time I'm going, come on, people, let's move. Let's get past this now and get a little bit more sophisticated in how we turn this into value.
So is your methodology, and this is really widespread, and you talk about it, the use of persona design to really help describe what those needs are? Are you a big believer in that?
Well, persona is one tool. So what I like to do is understand people full stop. So whether you package that and ultimately represent it in a persona, that's one thing. But the learning part is who are they? What do they do? Both from a customer perspective of how you interact and how you engage, and also from a user perspective of how they interact with the product and service. And then lastly, where do they do it? What's the environment they are in? What's the situation they're in? Which is also highly... It always comes back to mobile. If we talk about mobile use, people, and I still see that a lot of teams, when you walk in, the first conversation and people about mobile, they talk about being on the train and being on the road. But where the biggest use of mobile, of course, is in the home. It's just sitting stationary in your couch doing your mobile banking, because it's easier than going to your desktop and to your laptop. So it's what are we talking about? Can we just know what the context is? Can we understand where we are using things?
Well, it's funny that companies even keep thinking about channels as opposed to the omni-channel experience, right?
Yeah, and see it much more fuzzy, but much more holistic in saying, let's just learn from what the situation is, where people do it, what they do, who they are, and the who they are is the persona part, but the journeys is the what they do, and then the context is kind of in the middle, saying, well, both the journeys and personas would have some of that. So learning that, let's start there.
Yeah, but so I'll go back to the confusion, because it is still the whole concept of experience design and so on is still cluttered with different terminologies and technologies.
Absolutely.
Pick up a systems design textbook these days and flip through it, and you're as confused by the end of it as you were at the beginning. And so a lot of these terms pop up in language. You mentioned journey mapping. There's a different type of journey maps. There's journey analytics. Where does that fit in? There's personas and the different types of personas, depending on whether you're doing UX or, in fact, describing an overall experience. What are the artifacts that are most essential, in your view, to the success of the process? The artifacts that you create that are fundamental to success.
Yeah, ultimately we're building on what people are doing already today. So and what they've been doing. So we're building on the old school product design, user interface design, user experience design, artifacts like wireframes, like schematics, like anything, foam models, any materials, anything that we used to do to mock up and to prototype these experiences. We're building on that. And so what I see is that our tools are the same as they before. We still need to do wireframe. We still need to figure everything out in prototype and everything we were doing before, absolutely. But on top of that, now we're going to look at this broader and say, let's not just look singularly at one product and one small service. Let's look at it broader now and combine these things. And we need artifacts to capture that information. Mm-hmm. And that's what the journey mapping is doing. And the persona has been around for a while. User groups and customer segmentation. That's of course that's not a new thing. It's just relabeled a little bit, but that's still the same. But I feel that we're very much building on top of it. Mm-hmm. And we're adding these tools like journey maps to help us organize ourselves.
And what about workshops? For example, empathy workshops. I have personal experience with those, work quite effectively in getting a group to really sort of see the pains and gains of the customer's experience with a particular scenario. Do you agree with that? And are there other types of workshops that you find really work well in getting alignment and sort of a unification of vision around customer experience?
Definitely, I see those workshops. They're to some degree effective for sure. It's collaborative design, and collaboration has always been a tool in the toolbox. And I see design thinking has pushed it a bit more. So you hear more about co-design and about the empathy part. More, I'm not particularly let's all do this now. I think it's one way to do this. In research, it's a very good practice to always triage your methods, and so let's not rely on one method only, but let's do a couple. And so let's do some interviews and see people and meet them, do some field research of ethnography, do a co-design workshop, absolutely, do a survey, do some analytics and combine them all. Mm-hmm. So never rely on one. And that's sometimes what I do see in the more so in the design thinking world than others. It's that there's a reliance on this singular process to say, let's all do a workshop now. and then we're surprised that we don't get the results we were looking for, because it is containment. There is bias even in those workshops. That if that becomes the only source of information, that's dangerous. As I want to de-risk my designs, I want to do it in a good business way, which then means I have to use the tools that are appropriate. So not just focus on one single thing. So that's what I see as the tools that we use. But it's one of them, definitely. I see it as one of the tools.
And when you're brought in on an engagement, is there continuity for you? Like, do they come in, do knowledge transfer, and then march off on their own, trying to emulate, the practices and techniques and artifacts you've created? Or do you find that there's a huge role for you to play in simply being somebody who continues to be a catalyst for change and keeping the fires going around this?
Yeah, we do it in the three ways. So I see, and I saw the book as part of helping that awareness. And so you can do the work for people, you can do the work with people, and you can help them do it themselves. And those are basically the three basic ways to do it. You can do it for them, which is the traditional consulting projects. You do it with them, you become a coach. And that's very much what the book is meant to help with, is to coach organizations to become more aware of these kind of things and help them get better. Or you train them, and then you never see them back in a way because they already know how to do it themselves. Yeah. Those are the basic three ways to do it.
And what about cultural change? I mean, making this pivot to customer first thinking is a tall mountain to climb.
Yeah.
What instruments or techniques are best used to try to socialize this concept and get people across an organization to buy into it and really eliminate the resistance to change or pockets of resistance that you often find?
I find the resistance comes from not getting it, and the not getting it is often because we've never done this before. That's the inherent challenge for any change management. But it starts really not just there. It starts with how do I know there's a better way? Tell me about that. And so the awareness of that newness, the awareness of the new process, that's really where I see the biggest challenge lie, and where I see it as an ongoing coaching role be most effective, is that we're trying to create more awareness. And the book is helping with that, to see there's a language there that people now can use to help themselves and each other understand that there is a process around it. There is some logic to this madness, and there's not just everybody's running around putting out the fires, but there's a concerted efforts can be done in this framework way to help them create better experiences. And I think that's there. But it's a longer road of awareness, no different than something like design thinking, where it took them a decade to get where they are now. If you look at the process in itself and the awareness and adoption test now.
Yeah. So it always helps, I suppose, to point the finger at companies that are getting it right. I think of Disney, the company that is all about creating happiness as their brand purpose, but delivering on that goal day in and day out. But those are the often referred to examples. Are there other companies out there that you look at and say they're really getting this right? Just judging by NPS scores, sometimes I suppose you can tell, but there aren't that many companies really at the top of that. I think of USAA, in terms of financial services, seem to really understand the concept. But what are some other examples that come to mind that you use in convincing companies this is a path to go down?
Yeah, so I will give you one example of a company that definitely got some of their journeys. So it's coming back to your earlier point around the overall life cycle. So end-to-end life cycle design is hard. And so there's very few companies, and to your point, Disney is one of them. Even though when you go to their website, as one of their channels, the website is a different level right now than what you have when you go to one of their parks. And it's simply not at the same level right now. And they could do better there. So looking at it from the life cycle perspective, it's really hard to find companies that do that. And I think that's either a discouraging thing or that's completely aspirational. You go, hey, there's a big opportunity here.
Greenfield.
Yes, we can do better. It's how you look at it. I see at the lower level, at the journey map level, so it's a journeys level, I see definitely companies doing it better. And insurance One of them more local that has recently definitely tried to do a lot better job, and they use this, I think, as a new way to enter the market. Is Sonnet is the insurance company, and they split it off from a parent company to start a new experience, which was more online, which was. And sometimes, and that's always for me the reminder of that these innovations don't always have to be earth-shattering. But as we all know, car insurance doing that completely online, that's still an innovation right now, because very few allow you to do that. There's still a phone call involved, and there's still paperwork involved. It's still a fairly archaic process. So moving to digital, moving to a complete online self-serve model for insurance, that's a big innovation still. And so they have been fairly successful in doing that, and creating a website that supports that more than others do. And so I saw that at the journey level, I think there's a lot of organizations that have part of that right. And this would be one example.
So if I can play that back a little bit, there aren't breakthrough companies in the sense of really, apart from, I imagine, digital startups, which have a blank slate and can do whatever they please, but much harder for companies to make that pivot today, and there are a lot of examples other than, and I think this is the point you were making, putting up the flyers, and that's the journey mapping piece of that, right?
It is, and that's and I think that's where digital transformation still to this day lies. And I'm looking, and I see some of these bigger projects come up, but it's still early days, I think, in terms of real digital transformation in the truest sense that companies really move to that. We're not there yet.
It seems to me this orientation now toward looking at companies like Apple, which incidentally, it's interesting that they're no longer going to be announcing product unit sales, but that a lot of their revenue today is actually coming from the services side of their business, which effectively, really, they were early to this in creating an ecosystem that really extended the experience beyond products. So they were a forerunner of what we're starting to see. Amazon. Its diversification, its horizontal integration, so many ways that they've been pioneers. Is the future of business to look at the world the way those two companies do, which is to say, we need to create an ecosystem of partners, we need to create extra value in every way we can, even if that means smoothing out the value chain or integrating other partners into the mix here, and delivering value in many more ways we can do, because it's the idea of gaining a trusted relationship with the customer is going to shrink and shrink and shrink to a very select number of companies that can deliver against all of customers' expectations today. Is the future of business, to ask a really long convoluted question, the adoption of ecosystems as fundamental to success, and what is the implication for design thinking in that instance? Does it sort of change the whole idea of design thinking, or is in fact design thinking essential to the success of an ecosystem approach here?
I think there's two answers to that. From an experiential perspective, I would say yes. So when you look at it from the human and the experience that the humans have with the company, I think the Apple model and the Amazon models are the obvious next step. Is that we're integrating more of the chain, we're integrating more of the experience, we connect the experiences more. Absolutely, I think there's no doubt about it that companies will create more value when they start to do that. Mind you, for example, Apple, you didn't have retail stores before. So they used to have only online or through other B2B environments. So they chose to become more owners of their own experience by creating retail stores. And I think that's always, it's been a while now, but there was a long time when they didn't have that. So realizing that, I think they made a very conscious decision that they want to own more of the experience, which I think talks to this whole ecosystem kind of thinking.
Well, those are trillion-dollar companies, or almost trillion-dollar companies, and can have the deep pockets to fund that sort of ecosystem. But I'm thinking of companies that don't have that amount of resources at their disposal. Can they form partnerships where they effectively create a marketplace in the particular categories they serve, and through extended partnerships that are companies that aren't directly competitive but indirect competitors basically form critical mass around serving that marketplace? In other words, taking the Amazon or Apple model, but particularly the Amazon model, and applying it to a different business.
Yeah, and I think you see that already. I think it's so the short answer is yes, but I want to give another example that's more on the business model side, which is recently car manufacturers now start to offer a subscription to cars.
Right.
And so what they're doing is they're taking away the complexity that is all for us car owners exist today, that we have to service our cars, we have to deal and think about insurance, we have to deal with owning it, and all that stuff now is lumped together into one monthly payment. Yeah. And I don't even own the thing anymore. I just rent it as a full-blown rental car forever. Yeah. And I think, I think that's an obvious good idea. And it's obvious there's a market for it because they're successful, even though one of the car, I think Cadillac stopped it, but Volvo is still doing it and they're adding to it. That model of thinking like a service, so it's car as a service, we have software as a service, now we have CaaS, we have car as a service. It's a natural progression to a lot of these things. And whether they do all the components themselves or they partner up with different partners to make that all happen, I think that's completely up to the business people. But I think, to my earlier point, as opposed to Apple is more on the experiential side, I think that's more of a business decision side, where companies, if they're smart and they create business models that make sense, they move away from products and they move, like we already, because we've basically been primed by that through our phones. And through the phone plans we have. We're now more and more used to a service approach to things. And now everything becomes a rental. Right. Right. Why not? So I think those are two angles to the same thing. So business model wise, same with Uber. I mean, when we look at it, it's a completely business model and an experiential one, because Uber is simpler and it has a disruptive business model. Yeah. And both of them, I think, made a success. Not either one of them. I think both were good. And now companies and taxi companies are catching up, and they have an app now that is more like an Uber app, which I thought was interesting because it shows the missed opportunity they had to do that in the first place. They've been around for decades longer, so they could have done that. So I think these kind of movements into an ecosystem kind of thinking, a service-like thinking, is absolutely growing and is absolutely the way to go.
And will lead to the halcyon days for systems design thinking and service design thinking, because all businesses will be subscription-driven and service-driven. Right?
I think there's a way to go. Absolutely.
There's a long way to go.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this conversation. It's been terrific learning for me too. So I really thank you, Ted, for that, and good luck with future endeavors.
Thank you, Sue.
That concludes our interview with Tedde van Gelderen. As you've heard, experience thinking is really a synonym for customer-first thinking. It's all about creating experiences that provide the best possible outcome for customers. You need to have a destination in mind. How do you want customers to feel about the experience? And then develop an end-to-end blueprint that connects every stage of the customer lifecycle. Without that blueprint, that holistic lifecycle view, you can't design a memorable experience. Nor can it be done ad hoc or piecemeal. It must be systematically engineered to unify brand design, product design, content design, and service design. And all of those design dimensions should ladder up to a vivid company purpose statement which explains why people should even care. You can find past episodes of this podcast on customerfirstthinking.ca, where you'll also find blogs, white papers, infographics, and more on the transformation of marketing. In closing, a big shout out to Brent Morris and Justin Eacock for their contribution in making this podcast happen. Until next time, thanks for listening.